We have 4 excellent speakers this time around, starting with somebody who's well regarded within our company and without, not only as a sharply intelligent leader and a dynamic speaker, but also for what he's been able to do with those talents, not only within ExxonMobil, not only within the Houston area, but in fact, even on the other side of the world. And please also make sure your phones are silenced and your laptops are closed as we begin. Thank you. Bryce Huschka, in a very unique and inspiring way, influences those who live on the other side of the world and in ExxonMobil. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bryce Huschka for his EM Talk titled, From For to With.
People say not to start with numbers, so I'm going to start with a number. Half of the American workforce spends their days wishing they worked somewhere else. How many of you have been there? This is where you turn to look and see if your boss is next to you. I've been there a few times. Last year, I thought I deserved an international assignment. So I sent this email to my boss proposing I would go on a learning and giving journey around the world. He was supposed to say no and convince me to stay. You know this backfires. I send the email, he immediately says yes, and I had not told my wife, Lauren. She couldn't believe it that I sent the email, but especially that ExxonMobil said yes. If you could go anywhere in the world and do anything, what would you do? We left in March of last year. We didn't have a return ticket. All we had were these backpacks. That was our existence. We had 6 changes of clothes, and they took us to 16 different countries and 84 cities and villages. But today is not just a travel story. I have a bigger mission. I work with ExxonMobil, but my life's work is education. I think the system is broken, and it makes us believe the goal is trying to be 1% better at the same things. We send our kids to college so that they can spend their careers wishing they worked somewhere else. I'm not going to settle for that. So 5 years ago, we started a program at Kansas State University to disrupt higher education. It reimagines the student experience where their career is a business, they own it, and they IPO when they graduate. Their valuation is their difference factor. We tell them it's what you do that no one else is doing. It's what people know you for. And when you teach this enough, you realize this isn't just an education problem. In a world that's increasingly competitive and increasingly automated, what makes a difference for people is just being different. So I ask again, if you could go anywhere, what would you do? My wife, Lauren, and I decided to live this idea of difference factor. It changed everything for us, the way we live, the way we work, and the way people know us. Here is that story. So we boarded the plane, and I was moving from the teacher to the student, and we were following this example that we use in the program of my buddy, and he was a photographer. He was burning himself out, and he decided to go mountain climb until his money ran out. His pictures went viral. He was not the best photographer, and he wasn't the best mountain climber, but he started taking pictures where few others could go. That is difference factor. And we knew the first lesson. Go places where you have to be different. So we went to China during the trade war. We went to Russia during the election scandal, and we went to Vietnam during their reunification day. Those fireworks are celebrating a victory against my country, the United States. We hit a little roadblock on the second lesson, which is to do interesting things. You see, my wife didn't exactly agree to this boondoggle. I think her words were a little more explicit. She had these rules because she's a planner. She likes to stay between the lines. You would think she works at ExxonMobil. And her 3 rules were no liquor from unmarked container, no food from unsanitary places, and absolutely no motorbikes. Seems reasonable until you realize that she ruled out so much of what's interesting about Southeast Asia. So we went to the place we could, a Vipassana retreat. It works like this. You wear all white, you have 2 meals a day, you don't talk, and you meditate the rest of the time. I absolutely loved it. It's 11 days. By day 3, Lauren did not. I believe she said, "Get me out of this asylum," and she went to grab the nearest taxi, which happened to be a motorbike. And then we met these gentlemen. There, these gentlemen. And you see that bottle with the orange stuff in it. It's liquor. And they raved about it by shoving it in my face. I'd like to see anyone here say no in Vietnamese. I'm pretty sure that I said more. And then in the name of culture, I went to pick this up in a bag on the street. It is soup from a cow's gastric juice. Needless to say, Southeast Asia decimated our rules, and we just embrace it. And that's why on our anniversary, it had us exploring the 55 ethnic cultures in China. It requires you to leave the train tracks and take these buses. And let me explain. You walk in, and you have to dodge these buckets in the aisle. You sit down and take off, and then all of a sudden people start spitting in them from all directions. And then you stop, and people put on these gas masks. And you're like, why are they putting on gas masks? Until you go to the bathroom. These are gender neutral bathrooms. At least they kept the hand sanitizer stocked. But if you keep going, because people turn around, you make it to these amazing places. We were staying with a Tibetan nomad family. You could romanticize this if all you saw was Instagram. We helped them out with their yak. We dried out the yak cheese. We braced our tent from a coming storm with yak hair. Lauren really immersed herself by falling in yak dung. I'm not a guy that finds that romantic. So we were staying that night with a mother, father, and a 3-month-old and 3-year-old daughter. It ended up being one of those nights where you just pray for morning to come, because it started raining, and at 12,000 feet, it was freezing. We split the blankets that you can kind of see scattered around in this photo. Our beds were grain sacks on top of brush. But no matter how hard I clenched those blankets, I couldn't escape this rain that was dripping on my head, so I stayed awake, and I listened to the mother rock her baby for warmth. Morning came, but it didn't bring relief. Wolves had claimed a baby yak. It was colder, and the parents had no choice but to light the remaining manure on fire in the tin. It turned it into a smoker. Lauren and I, our eyes were burning so bad, we get to the edge of the tent just to breathe. The baby didn't have that escape. I absolutely hated that night. But 2 inches from the ground, with all the comfort stripped away, you start to see real life. That 2.9 billion people still use wood and waste to cook. That those conditions lead to 4 million premature deaths each year. And that 103 million youth around the world lack basic literacy. Most of them are women. This is going to make me sound bad. Because at this moment, after these sobering experiences, I was thinking about myself. Because no matter how easy the teacher makes it sound to choose discomfort, it's so hard when the option for comfort exists. The simplest things were becoming utterly exhausting for Lauren and I. Doing laundry was swallowing days. We started to question the places we were going, talk about turning back, because I had these dreams before we left that I was going to rub shoulders with high-powered people and land some crazy opportunity. Instead, we're spending 3 days in the hills of Vietnam with Ku. That's her in the blue umbrella. You spell her name K-H-U. We couldn't talk to the nomads, but we could talk to Ku. She couldn't read any languages, but she could speak 4. She learned English when she was 10 by helping her grandmother out at the market. She lived in a place where women are marginalized. As a teenager, she was kidnapped for an arranged marriage. She fought herself out of that. Then one night, her sister disappeared to human trafficking. To this day, she's still fighting her sister out of that. It was the way she told these stories that said the most, because there was less emotion and more matter of fact, because for her, this was life, and Difference Factor was about survival. And brick by brick, she put together her English skills, her knowledge of those hills, and her love for hiking to help start a trekking company that only employed women. That's how we met Koo. On our first hike, she tells us her dream is to build a house for her daughter. And she turns to me and says, "Have you ever owned a house?" My heart sank. I've owned 3. And what was I worrying about? That was Koo. Question by question, she unraveled everything that I had taught about Difference Factor, because her secret to success was not built on all of that discomfort. It was built on the questions she asked her many guests. Because if you have to be so much more than 1% better, you do so by starting where other people left off. Over the next few days, Koo showed us this side of Vietnam that was a deeper side than you could ever find. And we saw these cultures and the clothing of these vibrant hill tribes. We saw the struggles of living in the village and this tug of war that was happening between tourism and tradition. She'd never been to a day of school. She never traveled out of Vietnam, but she changed the way that Lauren and I travel through life. The rest of that journey, we stopped seeking out places and we started seeking out people like Koo. Lauren wrote this moving blog post about Koo, and she was the Vietnamese Mary Poppins. She did something that I failed to do so many times for Lauren. She showed her a side of Difference Factor that Lauren could believe, that it starts with seeking out other people's differences, that it's spending time with people that aren't like you and seeing where it takes you. We always had this plan that we were going to use these experiences to give back. And the anchor for that was Junior Achievement. They are an NGO that advances entrepreneurship in vulnerable communities. They opened up another world for us that you couldn't find in a travel itinerary. We were in the classrooms of Indonesia. In Beijing, I was on a panel at a UN forum for social development goals. In Vietnam, it was absurd fanfare and packed auditoriums. We show up in this picture. We had no clue about this or the title. So I go over to check the program to figure out what's going on, and I see CEO on the program. I know you're listening, Darren. I'm just joking. It was crazy, but I honestly thought there'd be like this limo waiting for us when we finished. But apparently, future leaders still leave with their flowers on motorbikes. We didn't deserve to be on any of these stages, but that's the power of Difference Factor. It's why people asked, it's what we taught, and it's why we had confidence on the biggest stage of all. In Indonesia, Rob, the JA director, asked us to lead this day-long workshop for a program where there were 90 entrepreneurs that received seed funding from USAID. They were in this really low-income area called Trenggalek, where people live off a few dollars a day. And honestly, I think the best way for you to understand that event is to see a message we received from Facebook at the end. I whispered to Lauren that morning that we were on a leave, but it felt like the most important day of my career, because we live our life in years with these grand plans, and they live their life in days based on the next step. And we saw these struggles of the next meal, the next storm, of just being a woman. And we knew if we could just do a little bit, that it could impact generations. And so we turned, when it mattered to the most, to the material that we're talking about today and the example of people that we met along the way. When we were leaving the event, we're with Rob on the way to the airport, and I asked him, why did you trust us at this big event? And he said to me, people don't travel very far to see these students. It had nothing to do with your content, and it definitely wasn't your pedigree. I told him you were there to see them. We weren't the best teachers and we weren't the best entrepreneurs, but we traveled the world to help these entrepreneurs. And that is the easiest lesson about difference factor, because if you make it to this place where you're competing with no one, then all you do is aim and give back. This became the rhythm of our entire journey, so you kind of get the span of what we did. And then all of a sudden I got a phone call that woke up this dream. It was work, and they had a job waiting for me. I got off the phone and I told Lauren I was anxious because, as you can tell in this picture, I had to find a place to get a haircut. But I was also anxious because the job felt the same and so much had changed for me. My friend recently asked me why I came back, and I told him there's actually two reasons. First, somewhere between Spain, Morocco, and Portugal, this little surprise entered our life. And ExxonMobil had this new policy where a baby meant 8 weeks of paid vacation. I mean, paternity leave. I think I'm gonna get in trouble for that one. Paternity leave. The other reason that was that between teaching entrepreneurs and finding the most savory gastric juice, we honestly just didn't have time to think about other jobs. It would have wasted this experience. So I arrived at work on a Monday and I started on a Wednesday. And I can tell you ExxonMobil hadn't changed, but my relationship with work changed the day that I stopped thinking my company owed me the international job and I took it myself. I stopped working for ExxonMobil and I started working with ExxonMobil. And it seems simple until you realize how much human potential is lost between these otherwise meaningless words, for and with. Half of the workforce spends their days wishing they worked somewhere else, and we trap it in the dark alleys of our conversation. I am more fearful of being in the portion that's staying just because it makes me comfortable. Because I have moved from for to with, I can tell you that I may not work here forever. But while I do, I will have the wind of my company at my back and not in my face. Because when we were on this leave, we did way more with ExxonMobil than we ever could have done without. They introduced us to JA. It turned an interesting trip into a life-changing journey. Maybe the best place for me to transform education is right here. What else could we be missing? I know this early in the shift of my mindset from for to with, you can change the job that makes you feel anxious. Instead of competing on your new team, you can find things that no one else is doing and define your job. You can block your calendar in the middle of the day for something that doesn't seem like work, like transforming education. I know this because I do all of these things. I just left for 8 months, and I am so much more than 1% better at my job. I'm not waiting for a new ranking system to tell me that. So I'll leave you with this. People ask my favorite country. Since you guys can't ask questions, I'm just going to tell you. My favorite country was China. We spent the most time there, 2 months, in 11 different provinces, villages far beyond the city. And people ask what it was like. And I say a country is a sum of its people. Because it was a mystery to us what China was. But we saw all these different cultures and one thing in common, that people opened their doors to us, that they told us their stories, and they made us want to keep learning more. For us, as individuals in a big company, we're going to walk out today, and there's going to be layers of comfort and routine that stand in our way. Some people are going to see this as a once-in-a-lifetime travel story that seems out of stretch. Other people may say, this doesn't apply to where I am in my career, my job level. If that happens, I've missed the point. You don't need to remember the lessons. You just need to remember what they had in common. Difference factor for Ku was about survival. For us, it's a choice, and that's the hardest part. It's a choice to do things that no one else is doing. It's a choice of what you're going to be known for. It's a choice to take a step as small as sending an email. And I think that matters from the intern to the CEO. Today is about our influence. If enough of us make a choice to move from for to with, a company becomes the sum of its people. Thank you.